Okay, I think we might be live. I think we might be live. Welcome, 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 beautiful soul. Thank you for joining. Today we're going to talk about a fun little topic. It's about how does our soul learn? How do we learn as souls? How do we walk our path as a soul and integrate our experience? And how does that work? It's a fun one. I'm really excited about it. Before I get into that, I just had like this crazy sort of experience. It was a miracle, really. But it was just one of those isolated divine miracle things that you get sometimes. I sometimes call them godgasms, just to be silly about it all, to add some humor into it, to make it less, to keep it humble, right? To keep it silly a bit. Because these things can be quite unsettling to the reality when they happen like this. And I couldn't even really describe exactly what happened, but I'll try quickly just to give you an idea. I found myself, I was listening to something, and then I found myself stopping listening to that and kind of starting to talk with God and having a bit of a prayer. And at 1:43 p.m., I just got this wash of love over me that was like this, you're my child and I'm well pleased with you energy, is sort of what I was hearing. And I broke down, was like shaking and crying. Uh, I'm still kind of recovering from it. It only happened, 15 minutes ago or so. And so I was like, you know, I couldn't figure out what that was about or where that came from. And I realized that earlier I was asking God how I'm doing. I was asking if I'm doing okay, sort of like, and I also was sort of giving myself a bit of a hard time over some things that I did in the past that I failed at, so to speak, like at the human level, things that like didn't go the way I wanted them to go, things that weren't um handled the way I probably would want to in hindsight, which is always, our perspective in hindsight is always a lot clearer, right? And then I switched into this understanding of like, I'm willing to just receive. I even said, I believe, I'm willing to receive. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to stop focusing on those things. And, this isn't, this is a very normal little thing that people go through with these little, just reflecting, maybe sad about some of our things. And, um, but anyways, after saying that, and then at this time, my alarm actually starts going off in the middle of this wave of love that it's 1:43 p.m. because I have an alarm for it, because we do Happy I Love You Day, 143 I love you, and me and my kids do this Happy I Love You Day at 1:43 p.m. We always shout and scream about it. So that's why the alarm's going. So for all of this to all happen at that time is really kind of fun as well, right? Um, and it reminded me, it reminded me like of how perfect the timing is, because it's exactly that type of little lesson that we're going to talk about, how that all happens. Like for me, that was a sort of soul lesson, about how happy God is with his children, her children, however we want to see that. How pleased, right? And so that's where we're going to start off with, that God's well pleased in his children. Um, and the interesting thing about it is that we don't notice that pleasure or love for us from God, really, until we start to live and be in alignment with truth. We don't feel it as much. So it's this interesting thing that God's always giving us that, basically, always. And we're kind of, nah, I don't believe it. Is kind of why we don't feel it. Um, that's the main reason. So the human mind and body. So we'll talk at the human level first of learning. It has its own inbuilt learning and intelligence, right? In the cells itself, in all of the organs, there's neurons. Basic, not all of the organs, but in the gut and in the heart, there's neurons, and these intelligences in the body run everything pretty much autonomously. It's all veiled to us, pretty much. Not all of it, but a lot of it is veiled to us. And if you have any questions or anything as I go, feel free to leave them in the comments or in the chat. And we'll get to those after I get through the majority of the things that I'm trying to make sure we cover. But it's complex, which means that we've compartmentalized aspects of our psyche. So it's essentially subconscious or veiled to us. How, like, for example, our blood pressure is managed through our circulatory systems. So we could call that a circulatory force, is how it would be best categorized, you could say. And that circulatory force is managed by our body's intelligence automatically. The rest of our being, prior to the soul waking up to itself, the rest of our everything we're doing is this the same sort of thing. It's actually autonomous response to the environment. So the human mind, basically, the mind energy essentially just accumulates information about its environment and then patterns responses. It does this totally autonomously. Generally we call it the ego, but it's like there's so much nuance to it. But the part of us, we get associated believing that we're the human body. And while we're in that state, we're also we're basically observing patterns in the environment and then just responding to those patterns, which creates more patterning. And if we have an uncertainty arise, we tend to view uncertainty with fear. And then we have a conditioned pattern response for fear, depending on the level of fear. The more fearful we are, the more likely we are to just run away or perhaps fight, or whatever the fight or flight stuff kicks in, right? This is our sort of animalistic aspect of us that it's not really tuned into the heart yet. But when we're tuning into the heart, we're becoming awake. When the heart's becoming, instead of just doing what the thing seems to be, like the program seems to be saying, the mind's structure seems to be autonomously giving out these instructions for us to do this or that. Once we go, nah, I'm just going to follow the heart. Once we start doing that more, we start to like get the soul starts to go, oh, I think we're waking up here. I think we're waking up. Is that what we're doing? All right, we're doing it. Bang. And then usually there's an experience somehow at some point in that trajectory of opening the heart, there's an experience where we realize we aren't the body. Usually this can be this is usually very visceral and obvious to the person. So it can be like near-death experience. Kundalini awakening does this often, is very visceral. Out-of-body experiences or some type of astral projection thing might happen. But these various things happen usually, and it indicates to us that, oh, I'm not the body. Okay. Like, so we've probably heard people telling us that, or we've read various things. But it didn't really like sink into us yet. And then we'll have a visceral experience of it, a knowingness of it. And this is what a lot of meditative people are like sort of trying to bring about, right? With their, some of the meditation. And there's a lot of different practices that people use to try and bring this state, or this, what would you call it? Yeah, this experience of oh, I'm not the body. These experiences are triggered by the soul, I would say. So there's probably conflicting teachings on this, but as far as I can see, the soul itself is the one that discerns when it's time for the the full integration to really start, and that can't start until we know for sure that we are not the body. It has to be like no question of a doubt in our mind, basically, for the integration to actually happen. When I say integration, I mean integrating into this concept that I'm not a person, I'm not really a human, I'm a spirit inhabiting a body. And that's what I am. I'm the spirit. And that's the truth of the matter for everyone. But prior to like even me saying these things, it may make sense, and there will be people that have had the experiences that I'm talking about and people that haven't, and it's all gravy, right? It's all great. But that's why we're talking about the trajectory of it, so that people, when you have the experience of realizing you're not the body, you then often go through a period of a type of psychosis where you lose your mind, really, because you literally need to lose the parts of mind that don't make sense with this new understanding, right? The mind has to crumble apart a bit, and this is a really uncomfortable time most of the time for people awakening. It's not usually like fun. It's not usually considered a good thing, a great thing, and it's usually called the dark night of the soul. We have different types of dark nights of the soul. We have different things that people might call them dark night of the soul. This is probably just the way that I would frame it. And we can go through multiple layerings of them because we can actually kind of go back to sleep and build more patterns that are not in alignment. And then we have to go through more, maybe mini dark nights or those types of things. So it can be a bit of a cyclical thing. And that's part of what the path is. It keeps us going, keeps us honest, really. If we start to do some of the habits that we know already that we don't really align with, and we're just doing them again, it's going to get like more and more uncomfortable, probably. And that's part of the learning. But basically, what I was saying earlier explains all human behavior. So, and it's one of the reasons narrative therapy models are so great. We understand that the being that is doing what it's doing is doing so in response to its environment of where it grew up, the narrative it grew up in, as well as its environment in its own body and whatever, abilities or other disabilities, perhaps we could call them, or dysfunctions that it might have cause it to then be the way it is. And it's entirely sort of obvious why they are doing what they're doing, whatever it is, until they realize they aren't the body. They're gonna basically do that. All humans will always do that. They'll be exactly as the environment calls for them to be at the consciousness frequency they're inhabiting. So depending on that frequency of consciousness, that they'll do exactly what that frequency calls for, basically, unless they're afraid, or their frequency could be in primarily fear. And that's when we see the most kind of confusing things. We're like, why would they do that? Why would they even do that thing? Well, because they're afraid, and when people are afraid, they just do wacky things. It's that's it. It's that simple. But of course, there's so many things in the world. But it's important to recognize that, because it helps us understand where some people are at. They're just in that space. And when they're in that space, there's not really any role that we have with them necessarily to change anything about that. They're just a soul collecting experience, the same way we were before we had our big pops of awakening, and it's not really for us to get too involved, unless we feel like it's important or something. I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying, because at some point, like it's important for sometimes us to gently say, hey, you can wake up from this thing that you're thinking about and doing if you want. You know, but gently, with like planting little seeds, not dumping not dumping a whole bucket of seeds on them and then dumping a bathtub of water on them. Right? Like, be gentle, right? A single seed here and there, and see if anything blooms out of it. You know, that type of response, I would say. That's how I do it, because, or try to do it, because otherwise I can get totally obsessed with just trying to spread truth all over the place, and it's annoying for most people. It's annoying. It's actually annoying for me sometimes that I'm this way. So once we realize what we are, the path becomes more demanding of spiritual responsibility. This is really important that we notice this, because once we realize that we're a spirit inhabiting the body, when we're doing things that are like, not doing things, when we're being ways, holding intentions that are not in alignment with our spirit and our soul, then it's going to feel really bad. And because we know what we are, and we're probably denying it in various ways, almost always we are still denying it in some form or another. Otherwise, we'd just start to float around or something, right? Like we could do whatever, walk through walls and stuff, right? So if we can't just do that, that means we are denying what we are to some degree, and that's okay, right? But when we're uncomfortable in our life, usually it manifests in ways where, like, we're kind of in the middle of still doing a pattern that we know isn't good for us, and we know we don't want to do it anymore, but we're still sort of doing it. Like, that stuff will be pretty uncomfortable for us, even if it's a small little pattern. Like, for me, I think caffeine is a big one that wants to go, and I'm holding on to it. And, you know, it bugs me, some of these things, a little bit. Like, I want to let go of it, but I seem to be holding on to it. These things bother me. And they bother me because I know that I'm not sourcing my energy from caffeine. Caffeine isn't real. So what am I doing? Like, I'm very aware that behavior is not in alignment with spirit, with my spirit, like the knowingness of my spirit. But I still am doing it because I want to. Like, do you know what I mean? But these things might become uncomfortable for us. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having caffeine or coffee. Of course not. You know, it's just something for me that's been a thing, because it has to do with energy. Is why is like I feel like I need it to feel energized, and I know that is not like the case. It's not real. That couldn't be real. So I need to. That's why I want to stop it, right? But it becomes more demanding of spiritual responsibility, because the more we know about what we are as well, and the less authentically we show up that way. So if we know we're spirit, and we know that we're on this path, and we know we want to be peace, and we want to be the light, and it doesn't mean we don't have moments, but when we act out against people, it's like we know just how far away from our path we stepped for a minute there. Like, we're just very aware of it. It's not like there's more karma for us, or there's like, it's just we're very aware that, oops, I did it again, right? We're just aware that, whoopsie daisy, I got wrapped up in like gossip, even like gossip. Like, I get a little annoyed when people are talking poorly of other people around me. Even it's kind of like, and I kind of want to stop them, but I don't want to be that person really. But my spirit's kind of calling me to be like, to just be like, I don't think we need to talk about other people negatively. Just in a group like that. I think my spirit is calling me to do that more. just to be just to give anyone permission who is in agreement with that to be like, you know what, he's right. You know what, I'm gonna stop that. A lot of times gossip, we're just spreading, we're not even saying true things, we're just talking nonsense about strangers and stuff, or family members, whatever, right? It's all just very hurtful behavior, to be honest. And it's how so many problems get started as well, because people just make things up and tell each other about it, and then next thing you know, there's some problem that didn't exist, but now it's here, and now it's like a real thing somehow. You know, that happens so often, so often. So we get called more and more to do that, and that's part of the lessons. Part of the lessons are like, oh, you noticed that you felt uncomfortable not standing in your truth or authenticity right here. What's that about? And you can learn the lesson, but generally, in order to truly fully integrate the lesson, you have to do it at least once. Right? You have to show up for yourself in that moment and do the thing that your spirit's calling you to do. And that basically means, okay, we've saw the lesson, we've seen it, we've looked at why it was a lesson, we've learned from it, we learned the more appropriate like way we want to show up, and then we showed up. That's like the cycling of it, right? And so it goes, we'll get into like a little bit of the metaphysics of it, because this is kind of interesting, and I'm going to try and keep it fairly simple. But the first three chakras that we have, the red, orange, and yellow energy centers, are facilitating the experience in the world, the material world, and in the body, as well as relationships and psychic stuff as well. Like sort of the collective consciousness and unconsciousness of humanity, things like that, all are in there. There are other aspects of that collective up higher as well, but I'll get into that after. As the soul calls for experience of some kind, the energy centers that are all distorted are actually what create the lesson that's required. It's very basically automatic that way. The soul knows the other soul contractually able to deliver the right message, the right type of catalyst or stimuli to us. And we call them, because most of our lessons do involve other people somehow. Not always, but lots of them do. Most of our more challenging ones anyway. The soul will call the right person, and the right person will give the right frequency to the soul that will get processed through the red, orange, and then yellow energy centers. And depending on our distortions, we'll then have an experience of maybe agitation or fear or some other type of response. And if we're pure, it just travels right up into the heart, where it connects with the divine energy centers. It bridges in the heart up into the other energy centers, the top three energy centers. And so the heart is sort of the gateway. And if stuff is reaching the heart that's not pure, it can't exalt it. It can't raise it past the heart. The heart's just like, nah, this is not loving, right? So the heart doesn't really open to that experience, which doesn't exalt it into a divine experience. So when your experience is not loving and not divine, it's because we have distortions. So we have to recognize that we have so many distortions in those energy centers from our animalistic past, our cellular memory, our lineage, our soul's memory as well has distortions in it that get basically dropped into this as well. So we've got all of that we're carrying sort of in the body, really, and the auric field. And it's all coming with us. So it's really wise to recognize I have lots of distortions. Otherwise, I would be sitting in complete bliss and peace every moment of the day, without any wavering. We would never waver from that at all. And we would still be very here and present. That would be like what, you could call that enlightenment, would be that. Where, we get to a place usually around where we get into like the 80-90% where we're feeling pretty good about everything all the time. 80-90%. And that is usually the last kind of hurdle, that last 10% of our days where we can go, we're pretty good, and then we just dip down and we have moments, we have things going on. Jesus would say that we basically are bearing our cross. We're experiencing a crucifixion of some type each day. These are still lessons that we're needing to learn, more or less, distortions that we have. So it's really important just to recognize that those are there. They are an illusion, and we can step into the higher awareness and notice them as what they are in truth, which is a miracle. We can notice that the lessons are here for us to free us. Therefore, it is a miracle in there. There's a miracle here. There's love here in this lesson. They're being very mean to me. But in the lesson here, there's a lovely miracle occurring. I may not be able to see it right now. And I'm allowed to be upset. I'm not disparaging feelings here or emotions about painful events, painful moments, and painful things people do and say. That would be silly to repress our feelings. One of the worst things we can do is repress feelings. A feeling buried alive will never die. Someone said that. Someone wise said that. But it's true. So we don't want to repress our feelings, but at the same time, we want to recognize that our feelings are not an accurate portrayal of what's actually occurring. Our feelings are sort of our thoughts about the human aspects of it all and how it makes us feel about ourselves or about others or something, right? There's a layer past that where, no, it's a lesson, and all of that stuff in the universe is mirroring our own feelings about ourselves in some fashion. And it doesn't mean we're like to blame for anything. It's just that the universe and us, we call it for us to learn. That's how it works. That's how we experience reality, is we call reality to us to see, and then we project out stuff. We project it. We're just all basically walking projectors, really, of a single eye of consciousness. And then when we're looking through the two eyes, we're seeing a whole illusion of things. And so we're all sort of doing that at different degrees, right? But a miracle is happening right away, right now. Every moment, miracle, miracle, miracle. Miracles are the most natural thing in that way. So we can even come back into gratitude and just be like, isn't it like kind of a miracle that I'm even just alive? Isn't it a miracle that I'm just awake? Like I'm not sleeping right now, literally or figuratively, right? Isn't it a miracle that I have like people to talk to and fun things to do? And isn't it a miracle that I have all these seeming problems in my life too? At least I get to solve problems. That's probably nice, right? To solve things. I enjoy offering solutions. Isn't it nice? Isn't it a miracle that I get to find solutions to things? So we can totally shift our mindset. And then, we'll have the naysayers that'll sort of feel like, yeah, well, that's just ignoring all the issues. Well, I would say something to the effect of, staring at a problem doesn't resolve anything. Notice that there's a problem, but then get solution oriented, right? No one solved anything by staring at the problem, you know? If we were doing a math problem, it's like, what's 4 plus 4? We're like, wow, 4 plus 4. Oh, that's a problem. That's a, you know, you gotta, right? You have to find the solution. A lot of times we, humans in general, we sort of just like to talk about the problem. It's not very useful, really. It's just a lot of talking. So yeah, so we're not ignoring that there seems to be an issue. We're just solution oriented, and if there is no solution, then there's no problem either. I just need to accept it. Change what you can, change what feels like it's in your capacity to work on to change, and accept what you can't. Implement a solution if you notice one. I would say get your solutions from God, though, because the mind solutions are usually broken ones. They're usually ones that contain some level of brokenness in them that'll fall apart at some point. So when we're trying to resolve a problem, seek first the kingdom. Otherwise, we're just going to make a new problem probably in the future, which is fine, but that's how it works. Actually, every moment is the same cyclical occurrence. And the experience moves up, goes into the heart, connects in, becomes a divine moment, or something, or that doesn't happen. And then we reflect on these experiences, and we need to integrate. So we have the experience, and then we tend to have a reaction to it internally. We may react into the environment or not, but that's not super important right here. We have a reaction to it, an opinion about it, or feelings about it. Then that's where the lesson is. Basically, the lesson lays in how do we feel about ourselves in relation to what we just witnessed? What does it say about us? What is this saying about me? Not literally, right? Symbolically, trying to get as symbolic as we can. What belief do I have about myself that caused this to be an issue? And in like the most atrocious things in our lives, it's hard to notice what it is sometimes. And some of these things, I've found I try not to worry about what it means exactly. Some of these things, I'm not sure how to figure out exactly what they mean. But in my experience, the understanding just comes later. There's sometimes we're not ready really to get it yet for some reason or another. Usually it's something to do with like the story's not over somehow. There's something else. There's a lesson before that we need to get for the other one to make sense fully. Something like that's going on. So we don't need to worry about it too much. But trying to figure out why we feel the way we feel and how that indicates things we feel about ourselves, where we're limiting ourselves, because when we feel poorly about something, we're limiting ourselves in some way. And so our spiritual responsibility is just to be like, okay, well, my feelings are my responsibility. There is a way for me to retain my centeredness and power in response to anything in this world. There is a way to do that. And it's not necessarily easy, but seems to be the only real way, right? Like to be at peace all the time, because we can't control what's going to happen around us. So we have to be sort of ready for anything, you could say, which just means not really investing ourselves in these things that way. Instead, investing ourselves in aligning with the lessons and walking the path in alignment. And then everything that we thought that really we wanted in our life, or everything that was like part of our dream experience, our more authentic dream experience, starts to just come into the experience with us because we're walking the right path just by trying to be spiritually responsible with ourselves and authentic to ourselves. So after we notice that lesson, that's when we're like, okay, I notice I have this tendency to perhaps, someone was mean to me and I took their stuff really to heart. It's because I kind of believed them. I realize they're telling me mean things and I'm believing them. I don't need to believe them. Okay, I get it. Okay. After we sort of integrate, we usually have another test come. And I've talked about this a few times on the channel, but we'll have another test come. The test always comes after the lesson finishes. It doesn't necessarily come right away, but at some point it comes. And, you're just, are you going to embody the lesson, like the integrated aspect, or are you going to fall back into the old pattern? Either way is okay, but if you fall back into the old pattern, universe is just sort of like, okay, we'll just check that off and we'll put that aside because we're going to have to go through that again probably. The fun thing about this is that if you reintegrate the lesson really strongly, and just keep reminding yourself of the lesson, it almost becomes like natural for you to just do the good thing, or the thing that is most aligned. You tend to just automatically go that way because you're deprogramming the mind to even do the pattern things anyways. Instead of responding to the environment happens, and then you ask the heart or God, how do I respond? You don't just do. You're not just like, I know what to do. So you'll even notice some spiritual teachers are very slow with their talking and stuff like that. That's, I think, part of a byproduct of this state that happens, where you just become more not reactive. So someone like Eckhart Tolle, for example, who talks to a stadium of people, and he's just very slow and very methodical with his speaking. And there's been a lot of times I'm listening to him, I'm like, I would feel so, at least I thought at the time, I don't know how I'd feel now, but I would, speaking at that pace, that would feel uncomfortable with all those people. They would, and I noticed part of me has this feeling like I should talk as fast as possible, like so that I can be in front of people less speaking, I think, is where that came from. Where some of my fast speaking comes from, is from this, like, let's rush it and get it over with, because part of me still has like some stage fright that way a little bit. So I think that's where it comes from. And so when that's gone, it might be pretty normal for me to just, as I kind of pull in more information or something like that. But it's all just very interesting stuff. So I think I went through pretty much everything that I wanted to. Let's see if there's anybody here. Oh, there's a whole bunch of people. Whole bunch of chat. Joni White, thank you so much for this insightful talk. Very important. Oh, thank you, Joni. My pleasure. He says, it feels to me like all the current events that people feel strongly about, polarized one way or another, are catalysts for the collective consciousness, for us to work on for our individual and collective shadows. But it's not just a miracle. Yeah, that's true. That's exactly what it is. The earth is actually going through a dark night of the soul right now. And there, and it's been ongoing for a little while now. Yeah, it's the same, totally the same thing, I think. And then we are all at our different stages of it in our own journey. And so as the world starts to work out its own collective shadow, we as bystanders, we have choices about how wrapped up we want to get. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we're called to get quite wrapped up in particular types of things because we feel very strongly about it. So I would never say we shouldn't get into things. It's more like, can we do that without being super, super wrapped up and invested in outcomes of stuff? Or can, something like Gandhi, just it's not right for you guys to take over this country, so peacefully we're going to just say no. Like, no. Something like that makes perfect sense to stand up for things. But the question, I think, is just what are we standing for? What are we truly standing for? And are we just standing because someone else is standing? Right? Sort of like, I think sometimes we're doing that. Someone else is saying some nonsense, and then we're like, hey, we have to tell them they're wrong. Hey, what you just said's nonsense. They already know it's nonsense. Everyone knows it's nonsense. And unfortunately, that's not the case. People don't necessarily know it's nonsense. Um, whenever this is an interesting thing, actually. Thank you for helping us get to this, because it's something I wanted to bring up. Was the animalistic, instinctual part of us prior to waking up is basically programmed by almost any authority, perceived authority. So if you're essentially, when we're growing in our consciousness, usually prior to age 30, or just prior to awakening, to realize that's not, that's not really the way to operate. We're anything that seems authoritative or authority based, and we all have different like criteria for what that means for us. But if we're told something by an authority, or someone who just even seems super confident and authoritative, even in the street, for example, and then they'll tell us something and we're like, we're totally on board almost. Some of us are less like that than others when we're children and stuff. It sort of depends, but many of us we're programmed that way. That's kind of how we get programmed. And that's why, the media is so effective at this, and commercials, marketing, all of these things, because it just seems very official. It all seems very professional and official. So it just seems to be somehow authoritative over something. It seems to be meaningful, right? Yeah, so it's an interesting aspect of the mind as we start to shed all that, and then we become less susceptible, but still susceptible. We're still susceptible to it. If we're not monitoring like what things we're absorbing and choosing to integrate as truth for us, like it's one of the reasons we actually start to isolate as well, is because of that, is because we don't want to be taking in too much nonsense a lot of times. Sarah T says, curious about your perspective of the Bible being less of a moral ideology and more clear instructions for how to focus consciousness in a way that will align us with Christ. Result is naturally more loving, compassionate, and true. For example, the Ten Commandments. Yeah, so I would say that there's layers to the Bible and to these religious scriptures, we could call them, or these holy scriptures, perhaps. So in all of them, they were written, as I understand, in multiple layers. And this is part of the magic to these books, is that there's ethics and morality, purposefully smushed in there. And a lot of times it's distorted. It's there because there were people that thought that these were the rules that they should be. The Creator itself does not say words such as "thou shalt not." That would be man that does that, that says that. The Creator is more saying, go and be as you wish and accept whatever consequences that arise from that. So it's free will, right, that way. Free will at the human level is quite a bit of an illusion. It's more autonomous at the human level. The soul is the one with the will, the extension of the will. And the soul doesn't truly know how to properly act out of harmony with God. So whatever the human's actually doing is, it might be totally disconnected from all of that, and it's doing some insane thing. I think that ethics and morality are a really interesting and challenging topic for us to talk about right now in the society as well, because everyone's all about freedom and sovereignty, but everyone's also all about telling each other what to do and not do. And so we can see really clearly that, like, even years ago, people used to morally have problems with, and they still do, I guess, with gay men and stuff like that, or lesbians, or what all the terms are, that community. And people still do have like moral issues with people having that sexual relationship. Uh, so we can see that just morality itself is basically an opinion. So if people are putting opinions into holy works, why are they doing that? And basically, there's layerings to it. So there's this layer of like, we want people to have this foundational structure of morality and ethics. But then there's also a layer of Jesus wanting to show this is the way. I am the way, like demonstrate the way. But then there's also layerings to show that Jesus was super special and was like, you couldn't be the way Jesus was, like pedestal Jesus enough that God seems separate to the everyday person, right? To keep people essentially from realizing Christ consciousness within, and or having that cosmic consciousness experience and awakening. They want people to believe that they're separate. Um, so, this is just the nature of most of the religions that I've seen, and the way that they teach a lot of it, and not all of it. And there's nothing against the religion. The path the path to God shows up so many ways, and all paths have a purpose. Part of, I think, religion's major contributions is to show the unification of God as one by writing all of these varied stories of the same thing in different languages, and over many thousands of years, it's all the same stuff, right? So it becomes obvious that humans are just writing a bunch of stuff, and and a lot of it's very divinely inspired, very divinely inspired, but it's it's all sort of saying the same thing. Love your neighbor as yourself. So some of the commandments, like it's more like God will tell us some good things to do, things that are good to do, but won't really tell us not to do things. Other than saying, if you sin, which just means to be led astray from the truth of God, which would be the truth of divine oneness, the truth of the Christ, to hurt someone purposefully or something, for example, or hurt yourself purposefully, is to sin. And so God might say, you'll pay the consequences for your sins. But even those sins are like illusory. They're illusions of the separation environment, right? If that makes sense. So those sins don't technically really exist. That's part of the lessoning. And then the Bible has mystical keys. It's mystical keys throughout it. Some of the keys are like more obvious, but like everything, that all the names mean something special. Different dates and times mean things special things. The different metaphors, they might seem to be teaching a moral metaphor, but it's actually more like a spell almost. Not quite a spell, but it's a mystical correspondence of some kind. A reference to zodiacal or other mythos that, so it has all of these layers. So you can tell that it's very divinely inspired. Like it's not, I don't consider these things like the word of God, really, the way some people might. And this is just my personal thoughts on it, of course. I think that that a lot of it was very like straight from the mouth, but humans with everything that comes from the mouth of God they get their paws on it and turn it into something else, right? So usually, and it's almost, I don't think I've really seen anything that isn't like that. I don't think I've ever seen really anything that's totally pure, other than just the phrase or I am. Anything else is like there's distortion added. Basically, I think just because of speaking, more or less, language itself, because it takes the infinite all and has to put it into boxes. So once we do that, we've messed it all up. So the truth of God is love, and that could be the word, right? That's just the word, the law, the word. So that could be the ethics as well, and the morality, right? It's all the same thing, I think. As long as people are acting out of love, truly, like authentically, not a weird human attached love or fear-based thing, but an unconditional, free expression of love, then they can't possibly do anything hurtful. They just can't. They just not able to. They won't even consider it. And if they're in that state, they also won't consider a threat. So whatever people are threatening doesn't really make a difference. And the people that want to threaten and hurt and harm are in vast minority to the people who want to hold peace. So yeah. Sarah says, last time I was verbally assaulted, I stayed centered and told them the conversation was over. Best wishes in their life, and I love them. Yeah, that's great. That's amazing. That's exactly what we should try and do. If we have the tank, like our peace tank, I like to call it, or our love energy tank, whatever we want to think. But if we have it in ourselves to be able to give that, the best thing we can do, though, if we can't give that, is just leave. Don't even say anything. Don't react. Like, just get out of there. Otherwise, we might invite karma. This comes back to the spiritual responsibility. It comes back to spiritual responsibility as far as if we react emotionally, almost always we're going to do something or say something kind of off. We're going to over attach ourselves to something with them, or something, our wound's going to come out. We're going to say something a little lashing out a little. It's not going to be quite right. So instead of doing that, let's just keep that in our consciousness here, in our thoughts. Let that roam around a little bit, and maybe let some of that drain out of us into the earth, right? Before we go and get in their face. So it sounds like Sarah did it well. And but if we can't do that, it's best to just walk away. But if we don't notice that either, that just means we have to try to learn to be a little bit more mindful when we're starting to lose our center. If we can. Sometimes we don't notice, right? We just are suddenly upset, and then we do something or say something. It's okay. E says, I noticed that Ram Dass would sometimes pause and close his eyes for a few moments. Yeah, because he's mostly channeling state, right? Especially when teaching or speaking, or there's a desire, spiritual responsibility again, to be as pure as possible. And that influences this, and it influences the rate. And for me, I still speak like too quickly, and it's one of the reasons that I ramble myself out of flow as well, a little bit. If we watch me talking, I'll lose track of some of the things I'm saying, and that's primarily what that is me like losing the channel for a minute, because I got Sean was going, and I like lost it for a second, usually. he says, I was thinking earlier about the Christian Catholic Church, how it was an attempt with merging or integrating Christ consciousness with the current foundational values at the time. In my opinion, the only problem is that it may have been built on a faulty foundation. Yeah, yeah, like it was, most of the religion was built to control people, really. They thought they were righteous though, as well. Like they did generally believe that what they're doing was the right thing. So it's like, it's challenging for me to like, if we read it all and go through it all and look at it from a lens of a deeper symbolic lens, all of it is very, very profound wisdom. So it really doesn't matter what they were trying to do with it. You know, at the end of the day, there's lots of wisdom there. So, you know, it's kind of like some teachers, like they'll write really good books, or they'll teach something really profound, but then like in their personal life, they might do something weird. And it's sort of like the teaching itself stands on its own to a degree. As humans, we connect it all. Like, we're like, well, that teacher, then, if they weren't purely embodying everything they ever taught, then they're not, we shouldn't listen to anything they say. And I mean, that's a way we can go, but I would just say that if the teaching itself resonates purely as true, then the teacher being in their life certainly says something about them. Sure, but also the teacher, what they taught is really at the crux of it all, the core of it. And that's where the fruit is. And the mind's really happy to ignore amazing teaching by blaming, you know, a faulty human for something. So it's interesting. It's interesting how we do that. And so the only reason I'm saying that is sort of like, if we toss out the teachings in religion without saying, hey, there's actually tons of merit in the teachings, when they're perceived with the right perception, when they're seen properly, there's tons of merit and value in all of it. All of it. There's a reason that they're considered holy and sacred that way. They all calibrate quite high on the consciousness scales as well, like up in 700s and stuff. Other than some of them, like the Book of Revelations calibrates quite low, because it's like basically a tale of terror, right? So but it's all symbolic, so it's not distinctly true. It's just symbolic. But anyways, yeah, so it's really interesting. And we don't have to agree with the formings of it, the history. Like, we tend to see the Bible like as almost like a history book in a way. I wouldn't even think of it like that. I would just think of it as like a story. A lot of the things certainly happened, I think, but I don't think the times were right. I don't think the names are right. I don't think any of it's right. Like, I don't think any of it's really totally right. You know, I think it was written a very specific way, very calculated, either by, and I don't even think human intelligence would properly be able to put this together, like with all those layers. So wherever it came from, you know, it came from the stars, really, right? Let's be serious. And then people did whatever they did with it, you know. And it's really interesting. We're seeing the same thing now with all the different channels, random people. They're bringing in like similar information in different ways and talking about it in different ways. All the people that do the same type of thing that I'm doing, just talking about consciousness, expanding consciousness, spirituality. We all sort of end up in these similar flavors of things at the same times, because we're all getting the same information, basically, right? And we're really just kind of putting it out for all of us to also absorb and be like, oh, that's true. And the more people hear truth and then get on board with it, the more collective consciousness rises, and the more the more that the earth wakes up, So I think that's a good time to end. I have to go hang out with my kids for a couple hours. Sarah says, I definitely started interpreting the Bible completely differently once I had a Kundalini awakening and had eyes to see and ears to hear. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It takes on a completely different meaning. Even all we really have to do is remove our filter about it. And I had a really big one. I didn't even look at the Bible for years and years and years. Even after my awakening, I just didn't want to. I didn't want it, Actually, in fact, didn't like it. I didn't like it. I thought it was weird. Just being honest. My experience with religion turned me off of the Bible quite significantly until I was about 33, 34. And now I think back and I'm like, wow, I can't even believe but I know that was the way it was supposed to be for me. But, yeah, once I stopped having that filter, once I could look at it objectively, just be like, let's pretend this is the word of God for a minute. Let's pretend it's a story and it came down from God, and let's read it. And, there's actually a really good version on Audible, narrated by the guy. What's the guy's name that does Darth Vader? The voice of Darth Vader. Whatever his name is, but he does a narration of the Bible, the King James version, and it's amazing. And it's amazing. But yeah, so I think that's it for me today. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate all of you. Thank you for all the questions, all the chat. It's amazing. I really appreciate the talk about the Bible and stuff like that. It's interesting to talk about, and again, always want to share that all paths have a purpose. So whether we're in a religious path or not, the only real thing that I ever say, James Earl Jones, that's it. Thank you, E. The only thing that I ever really say is the dogma, is just boxing our mind. And when we box our mind, we get stuck. So that's really the only sort of downside that I see in religion. But if we can participate in religion or be a observer of it, however we feel comfortable, while not letting our mind get boxed, then it's all good. It's all great. So we can stay a part of our group and community. But we might find that people don't want to hear what we have to say. So, that comes with the territory of being able to see truth. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you. Love all you. Take care.